Hi Pirates, I'm here to show you the shelf bra lined option of our new Be Bold bodysuit. I'm going to sew up an adult version here, but it is the same exact construction method on the youth. This is going to be my main, this beautiful floral fabric, and these little polka dots are going to be my lining. So I have a front and a back of both the main and the lining. I'm doing the cropped version here. Here's my back. I have a low back and a low front. I'm gonna sew them at the shoulders, and then I'm gonna repeat the same thing on my lining. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out my lining, my main fabric, just like this. There we go, my main fabric, just like this. Again, I have the low front and the low back. Be careful if you're doing the cropped with what is the front and the back. Sometimes it's a little tricky to tell which is which depending on which necklines you used. And I'm going to lay my lining on top of it, right sides together, matching my neckline. And I'm going to go around and pin or clip in place. I usually like to clip at the corners and the shoulder seams. As you can see, the lining is much more narrow than the main. This is to help the lining go to the back and not peep out. So once this is all sewn up, a bit of the main fabric will wrap around to the back. Grab a few more clips. And it just helps if you do not want to top stitch. It helps that lining to stay under the inside of the garment and not peek out. So you will have some easing to do since they're not exactly the same. But in the end, it's really nice to have the main kind of wrap around the underside, the inside. So it kind of helps keep that lining from peeking out. Okay, we're going to sew this neckline. When we sew it, we are going to use some kind of elastic in this neckline. I usually use like a clear elastic For the video, I'm going to use this swim elastic because I think that it's easier to see in the video. Swim elastic actually also works really well too. I believe it's a little more expensive than clear elastic, which is why I tend to usually use clear elastic. You're not going to see it, and if it's not for a swimsuit, there's no reason to pay the extra for the swim. But since I want the video to be nice and easy for you to see and helpful, I'm going to use the swim elastic since it's a little easier to see in a video. One thing important is when you're stitching the neckline, you want to make sure to have your elastic touching your main fabric. I always like to have my elastic on the top so I can see it. So I'm going to sew it just like this with the lining on the bottom, the main fabric, and then I'm going to put my, this is 1/4 inch elastic right in here. I'm going to swing you back real quick to the serger as I set up. Nice and close. I'll show you how I like to get it in there. A lot of times I see that you struggle starting off with elastic both on the sewing machine and the serger. I am going to be using my serger for this. You can sew this with a stretch stitch on your regular machine as well. So what I'm doing is I'm aligning all the edges here and putting my pin in place. My elastic's gonna be right up on the edge. I'm just gonna trim off these serger tails so I have a nice smooth section right there. I've nested these seams, which means my main fabric seam allowance is going one way and my lining seam allowance is going the other way. It just helps it lie a little bit more smooth. If they're both pressed to the back, it creates a little bit more bulk than what you're gonna want. So I lift up, I leave my pin in there. I can see my elastic and I'm just gonna do one stitch so that my needles are in there. I know it's holding all 3 layers exactly where I want before I take off. I also turn my knife off. The neckline has a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so we're not going to be trimming anything off. So just turn that off. You don't want to nick your elastic, whether you're using clear elastic or swim elastic for a swimsuit. You don't want to nick your elastic because you want it nice and strong and stable. The whole point of putting the elastic in is to make sure your neckline stays nice and stable with wear. All right, again, we're going to be easing in this main fabric to the lining since the lining is slightly smaller. I don't give elastic measurements in this bodysuit, and one of the reasons is there's a million options. Another is because it depends on what kind of elastic you're using. Even within the clear elastic, different brands have different stretches and stability. And it's really about a feeling. If you are a beginner and you haven't sewn in elastic very much, I highly recommend getting like twice as what you need and then using it on scraps until you're really confident with it. There's just a feel you get where you are not stretching the elastic, but you're not easing it in. So here's easing it in. As you can see, it's really loose. I'm not holding it at all. I would allow the machine to take it in nice and loosely. We don't want to ease it in. We also don't want to stretch our elastic. So we just want it exactly the same. We say 1 to 1. That means it's nice and taut, just like the fabric. So we're not adding any in. We're just, what I usually do is I let my fabric fall on the sewing machine and then I just put it nicely and neatly. So I don't let it hang loose. I don't stretch it. I pull it taut is what I like to say over and over if you've watched any of my videos before. So I want my elastic nice and smooth and straight, and then I'm going to take off. This is how we're going to attach it along the whole neckline. And when we get to these corners, all we're going to do is round them as quickly as we can. Even though it's a square neckline, I rounded these corners a little bit on the pieces because it's much easier and quicker if they are a little bit rounded, and you still get the overall effect of a squared neckline. So I'm going to get pretty close, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a pleat right at the corner so that I'm going in I'm making the neckline as straight as I can, and you can see it's pleating or gathering up right here. And that's how we go around. It will give us a pretty squared look. It will be rounded in the end, but the pattern piece is slightly rounded there as well. So I'm gonna keep going. And you can see me do the 3 other little corners again. If you're a beginner, another really quick step that will make this easier is if you baste your lining and your mane together all along the neckline right here. That's just one less thing you have to worry about, keeping all those layers together. I didn't quite trim them nicely enough. Here we go. Because right now I'm having to make sure all 3 layers are together and nice and even on this edge. If I basted my lining and my mane together quickly on my sewing machine, I would only have to worry about attaching the elastic. So if you aren't super comfortable yet with elastic, knit fabrics, your serger, even if you're attaching this on your sewing machine, if you're not super comfortable with attaching elastic perfectly, basting the mane and the lining will help tremendously. Coming up on another one of those little corners. My elastic still on the spool, which is what you can hear me kind of unwinding it. I never pre-cut elastic or picot or anything like that. I much prefer to do it by feel. Even my patterns that I do give elastic guides, I do not use them. I just do it by feel. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overlap this by a teeny smidge. There we go. I probably overlapped it by about 3/8. But whatever you feel comfortable with. Sometimes, so I don't lose this, I like to stick a little pin because I can hold on to it just a tiny bit longer as it feeds under the foot to make sure it's staying there. Alright, so here is our final seam. It's got that enclosed 1/4 inch elastic. My elastic is touching the main fabric. Okay. So what we're going to do is put it right sides out, which means the lining is going to here we go. Our lining is going to go underneath the underside, and you'll want to press this with your iron. You do not want to top stitch. Even if you want to top stitch your final garment, Do not top stitch yet. Alright, so our neckline's sewn. Looks nice, right? I'm just going to finger press this quickly because having a hard time not using a press. Okay. That helps me a little bit. All right, so we're gonna pretend I pressed this with an iron. It just always helps. Every time you step to the iron and give it a press, your garment smiles. All right, so here is where we get the tricky part. This is called the burrito roll method, is what I've always heard it called anyways, when you're lining any kind of tank top bodice. And it's really tricky to picture. We have pictures in the tutorial, steps in the tutorial, but it's just kind of hard to understand unless you watch somebody do it. So this is your first time watching someone do a lined tank top burrito roll method. It's a little wild. If not, you can just sew along with me. I'm going to start on this side. It does not matter which side you start. And I'm just going to start rolling my fabric into a tight little roll. And this is obviously where it gets its name. I have no idea where it was first kind of nicknamed burrito roll, but it's what I've always heard it called. Okay, and you're gonna stop once you get to the middle of this other tank top. So it's all rolled in together here. This didn't roll very tightly, so I'm gonna roll it a little bit more here. And what we're gonna do now, I'm gonna go ahead and grab some pins so I'm ahead of the game. I'm gonna grab my main fabric and then I'm gonna flip my lining out. So here's my rolled section on top, and I'm going to take my lining and put it over the rolled section. So the little rolled section is now inside here, and I'm going to pin all along this arm side. My lining and my main fabric should now be right sides together. I'm going to really concentrate on this smaller tank top section and really try to roll that nice and tight. I am going to continue to nest my seams, so one seam allowance to the back, one seam allowance to the front, and a lining at this seam. Again, our lining is a lot smaller than our main fabric. This pattern calls for very high stretch fabrics, so it makes it a little bit easier on these narrow shoulders to make sure we're not getting that, because we can really just stretch it a little bit as we pull it through and finish this arm side. I do recommend adding in clear elastic into these arm size as well, because it calls for super high stretch fabrics. We don't want any of our arm size to just kind of lose shape throughout the day as we're wearing it. We also don't want any gaping there. It's an area where if you're curvy, you very often get gaping. So this will stabilize this seam right here, make sure it doesn't grow throughout the day. And it will also help the shelf bra have a tiny bit more support for your bust. All positive things, so I like to add it in. Again, you want to make sure your elastic is touching your main side of your fabric, so I'm going to flip it this way so that my lining is on the bottom My mane is on the top, and then I will add the elastic right there. Okay, we're nice and close. I'll grab my elastic. And the same way I like to pin it at the beginning. Make sure my needle's up. Slide it in. Again, if you are a beginner with elastic, knits, any of these things, take the time to do a quick baste of just your mane and your lining here before attaching everything. You'll see me do this a lot. All I'm doing is trying to make sure that that rolled section inside is nowhere near my seam and where I'm sewing. You do not want to catch this little rolled section in here into this seam. Also, since our lining is on the bottom, to remember that lining is more narrow than our main fabric. Just making sure I'm aligning all of these edges properly and catching that lining. And as we get to the end, we're not overlapping here. We're just gonna trim it right off. All right, and now we get to watch the kind of magical part happen. We're just gonna pull our burrito roll, our little section that's rolled up here out. So I'm just gonna stick my hand in, and here's the rolled up section. And I'm just gonna gently pull it out. Again, this being a high stretch fabric, it comes out pretty easily because your straps can stretch to allow the fabric through. Sometimes on woven fabrics, if you have more narrow straps, it can be a good while before you get it pulled through. But stretch fabric is great. All right, we're just gonna repeat the exact same thing on the other side. So I actually think I had it like this last time, the back and then the front up here, and I rolled this way. We finished off that arm side, and now we're gonna roll the other way and finish off this arm side. So again, we're just gonna roll, roll, roll till we get to that strap. Flip our lining. Excuse, this is my cover stitch sewing machine cord, if you're wondering what's over there. We're gonna pin just the same, nesting the seams, and sew. Let's take it back to the sewing machine and our elastic. Zoom in nice and close for you guys. I'm getting down to the very end of my roll here, so my elastic is super curly. And I'm having to unwind it an awful lot. I get these giant rolls. I've been asked several times. I get these super giant rolls. They're Dritz brand. I think I just bought them off Amazon, but it could have been So Sassy maybe. I'm really bad about remembering where I buy things. I get asked all the time where I buy fabric, and I just feel terrible, but I can never remember. I would love to promo the shops where I get fabric, but a lot of times I just cannot remember where I bought anything. Trim the serger tail since I have my knife off, my blade off. Sounds so quiet when I do these videos sometimes. I usually always am listening to something when I sew. I usually listen to audiobooks actually most of the time. I really love to read, and since I run P4P and I have 3 little kids, I never really get the time. And eventually I got talked into trying audiobooks, and once I got over the fact that I really missed holding an actual book, I really enjoy it. I know a lot of other people listen to podcasts while they sew, and then of course there is music. I actually never watch anything when I sew. I just never have. But I listen to things all the time, so sometimes when I'm doing these videos, I think, oh, it's so quiet. Alright, so our arm size are both sewed. We're still not going to top stitch quite yet. What we're going to do is we're going to put it right sides together, flipping up our lining. So here I'll show you just right sides together. The lining would be down like this, the shelf bra. What we're going to do is we're going to flip the lining up like this. So here's my back piece with it flipped open. It's kind of hard to give it a flat shape here. And then I'm going to open up my front, and I'm just going to align them from the top to the bottom. So this is actually the bottom of the shelf bra getting pinned here. And then I'm going to pin it at the seam here. Probably stick one more pin in just in the middle of that shelf bra, maybe. And then down at the bottom of the hem of this crop, if it was the bodysuit, you'd go all down the side seam. There we go. And I'm gonna stitch through the main fabric, through the seam, and up the lining. We're not going to add any elastic here. I'm going to turn my knife back on, because this is the 3/8 inch seam allowance now. So I'm allowing my serger to trim off 1/8 of an inch. I usually use these bit smaller seam allowances when I'm doing anything like lingerie, swimwear, anything like that. I'm so sorry, my battery died. I had to replace the battery. But here we are with the side seam sewn up, and you can just fold it right at that seam. And you can see it's really starting to take shape into a little crop top. We're just going to do the same thing on this side seam. Clip it up, right sides together on the bottom of this crop. And then we're going to flip the lining up again. And pin at the lining as well. I'm going to stitch through. Again at the 3/8 seam. Go nice and slow over that seam with the elastic. Your sewing machine will be cutting, your sewing machine or serger will be going through 2 layers of elastic, so go nice and slow over that seam. Alright, I'm going to leave it inside out for you for a minute. This is the back with the low back. And as you can see, even though I haven't even pressed yet, that smaller lining really helps just bring that little bit of mane to the back naturally. I really love that. It means if I don't want a top stitch, if I want it just a super clean front, I can have my way if I want that. And you can top stitch now if you would like to top stitch. Sometimes I still like to top stitch, especially my daughters. Since she's really young, she doesn't have a bust to kind of hold down the shelf bra very well. Sometimes I see her still peeking out even though it's pulled to the back. And sometimes I just like the pop of color for a top stitch. And so it just depends on what look you're going for, what fabrics you've chosen, things like that. So, but with this lining being smaller, you do have the choice not to top stitch, and your lining should be pulled to the inside and not peek out. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and I hope you like this method of lining. It's a really fun, neat way to line a tank top bodice. It's a super clean finish. You get all your seams covered, and it's just super nice. I love it. And I hope the video makes it nice and clear and easy for you to follow. If you have any more questions, you can always email us at help@patternforpirates.com, post in the Facebook group. And if you've finished yours and you're ready to show off, don't you dare forget to share, because we love to see your finished garments and we love to smile along with you with all your makes. And I can't wait to see it. Bye, y'all.